Today, I'm going to finish talking about macroeconomics and two important topics, growth and sustainability. Okay, so this growth, I believe this is chapter 25 of the textbook, points out that the determinants of GDP or determinants of productivity for a country, there may be four important things. Okay, one is physical capital per person. Okay, so physical capital, remember that refers to machinery and equipment that gets used in production, but it doesn't get used up. I tell a comparison of a nation producing, I make a comparison to my producing a cooked dinner. And there are many things, like physical things that go into production. Some are the vegetables and meat and so forth. Some of the other physical things that go into production include the stove, the knife. Okay, the stove and the knife don't get used up, and those are to be compared to physical capital. The ingredients into cooking, those are inputs into production. Okay, so physical capital per person. And so I bring up per person because a country can have a large capital stock, the amount of physical capital the country owns, but an even larger population. And so that capital stock has to get spread over more people. Okay, so determinants of productivity, physical capital, of course, but also how much it gets spread out among people. Human capital per person. Okay, so this is the amount that the country invests in each worker's skills and so forth. Skills, education. These human capital refers to characteristics of a worker that make that specific worker more productive. When it comes to cooking dinner, examples of human capital include whether I know how to boil water, how fast I can chop vegetables. Those are individual skills that make me more productive as a worker cooking that meal. Okay, third on the list was natural resources. And again, per person. I mean, all of these first things I've listed are per person because these are things that get, like as the population gets larger, they get spread thinner across the population. You might say these are things that are rival in use. Like, the natural resources per person, and for the most part, they're rival in use. If I use some petroleum to fuel my car, you don't have access to the same petroleum. Okay. And then the final thing on this list is level of knowledge or technology in the country. Okay. And for this thing, I'm thinking more of the type of knowledge that is a public good, that when one person learns this information, it can get spread among other people, doesn't take away from the benefit to other people. In this, think about, like, going back to my analogy of cooking, this might be like a recipe for cooking. Okay, that's knowledge that can get spread around. If someone develops a better recipe for making my dinner, then that means like we're more productive cooks in our society. But also, again, that's information that can get spread from one person to another. So we don't really need to say number of recipes per person because everyone can use the same recipes. Okay, so the same thing, level of technology. Um, and that does not get divided among people. So then when we think about policies to promote growth in a country, well, here is a list of things that should be targeted. If we want to grow our country, if we want to grow our country's economy, then we need to think about boosting physical capital per person, human capital per person, land resources per person, level of knowledge and technology. Okay, now I talked about some of the things that can be done to produce physical capital. We need investment. And investment can come from one of several sources. Government investment, the government can build infrastructure and highways and railroads and airports that assist moving troops around. Moving troops, sorry, moving goods and resources around. Sorry, I said troops because my mind was off in a different direction. Just random trivia. The interstate highway system was across US is one wonderful piece of infrastructure. Makes it very easy to get from point A in the US to point B. So it has a wonderful design and it like is very important in the US economy working very efficiently. Especially over the past year, you all have seen how great the US economy has been at logistics, like just getting things from point A to point B from Amazon, right? For example, doing a great delivery service. Okay, but I brought up, like I was thinking about interstate highways in the back of my mind. They were originally designed in large part to move military equipment around, including soldiers. And so it was an experience that came directly out of World War II. And as a matter of fact, President Eisenhower, formerly General Eisenhower, was the one who put forth this infrastructure project to connect all of the U.S. by high-quality highways that could be used to move military equipment, troops in case of wartime. It came directly out of his experience in Europe during World War II. Okay, anyhow, government can invest in better. The government can invest in better, like infrastructure for moving goods and services around. Government can invest in better, like internet services. Yeah, I mean, this has been something else that's become apparent over the past year is that there is a divide in the quality of people's, especially students, internet service, and some people can get wonderful like 200 megabit internet service, and others are like struggling to get 1 megabit. And so some parts of the U.S. have been more successful at educating students online. Okay, it's like investing in better internet connection allows workers right now to do their jobs remotely more effectively, students to learn better. So this is the kind of thing the government could invest in and kind of does. It has some programs for bringing internet to less served areas. Okay, government investment, domestic investment. So that means trying to get the people of your country to invest um, in, in improving their country. Now, a lot of domestic investment actually comes through people's savings. Um, Okay, so this is connected to a country's savings rate. And most people, or many people, when storing their money for future use, purchase stocks and bonds. Those are ways of loaning money to companies to help those companies fund their growth. Or as we say, like for those companies to invest in future productivities. So domestic savings, that's related to the country's savings rate. Also think of people who are saving money for retirement, put it into these mutual fund accounts that are buying stocks and bonds. And so that, like, through things like 401ks and other accounts, but those are a form of savings, and the money gets loaned to businesses to help them grow. So policies that encourage domestic savings will also yield higher growth. Okay, and then international investment, which is probably more important for developing countries to attract development from overseas. Developing countries, I mean less affluent countries, less wealthy countries. Okay, then continuing on my list, policies to impact productivity of the country as a whole, human capital. Um, Higher human capital investment. Of course, it needs to be per person, per student, more or less. Um, but human capital, think of schooling as the big one. So schooling, but also nutrition, health. Those are things that are part of human capital. Um, Again, the main thing we think of with human capital is schooling. And I said that, I gave the disclaimer last week. I am not a partisan person. And I have things that I like about political policies on both, or like among both parties, and there are many political policies that I disagree with in both parties. Having said that, the current presidential administration has put forth a proposal. I think it's, what is it, American Family First proposal, which, among other things, guarantees free or low-cost childcare, pre-K starting at age 3 or so for free. And so this does a couple of things. Okay, so providing families with childcare. Of course, one thing childcare does is it frees up more workers to enter the economy. That's good. Okay. Um, uh, well, if it's the right decision for a family, ensuring that both parents can enter the labor force and work in the labor force, if that's what they want, making childcare free or less expensive helps with that. Okay, and as those parents enter the labor force, they make contributions. But also, the thing that I like about childcare is it begins investing in children early. Invest in some of their education, their social skills. Um, okay, and so being in pre-K earlier might benefit human capital of those youngsters. Okay, so like on the surface, it's a policy that has great potential to grow the economy. Okay, now, as the expression goes, the devil is in the details. this policy could be enacted in efficient ways, or it could be enacted in inefficient ways. But on the surface, it seems like a great idea. Nutrition, ensuring that all, especially youngsters, have adequate nutrition so that they are healthy for adulthood. Health, ensuring workers are healthy. An unhealthy worker is an unproductive worker. An unhealthy worker misses work activities. There are many reasons why we want workers to remain healthy. Okay, then continuing on my list, but skipping natural resources for now. Level of knowledge or technology. Okay, investing in technology is something that benefits the whole society, and as I probably gave examples like the land grant universities. Okay, very deliberately are set up to research and improve agriculture and engineering. And many states, especially in the Midwest and in the South, have these land grant universities for that purpose. Okay. Okay. So that's one example. The government funds research through the National Science Foundation, through the National Institutes on Aging, National Institutes on Health, has a variety of programs that do directly fund engineering and research. And these are things that are good for society as a whole. Okay. So then, final thing on the list. Natural resources per person. And also, okay, so natural resources and the issue of population. Okay, so these are really the final two things on that list that I need to address. What can a country do to grow its natural resources? Or, as a matter of fact, when it comes to population, according to my list, population is something that makes a country less productive, right? It reduces physical capital per person, human capital per person, natural resources per person. The larger the population, the more those things are spread out. Everything else the same. Okay, so there is a drawback to per person, or like to a population growing, if it's not growing the capital stock, human capital stock, and natural resources at the same rate. Okay, so I will even mention this as a concern for development. As population increases, per worker productivity goes down unless capital, human capital, and natural resources grow faster. Okay. So here is really, I think, the heart of the concerns over what people call sustainability. Natural resources grow faster than the population. As a matter of fact, natural resources do not grow very fast, right? Our non-renewable natural resources are going to be gone. Okay, so to a very simple approximation, natural resources are fixed, right? Okay, and then population grows, then inevitably natural resources per person decline. Yeah? Natural resources are getting used up and not replaced. Plus, the resources per person are declining because of population growth. Okay, and this is the concern behind some things like Thomas Malthus, this English kind of economic philosopher. Um, Philosopher around 1800. I think he wrote his first book in 1798, where he made this sad prediction that because the population doubles about every 25 years, then in 50 years' time, the population of England will have increased 4 times. The amount of land is fixed, and therefore the population will grow to be larger than the land can support. Okay, it seems a very simple logical argument that eventually the population will be larger than the land can sustain. Okay, therefore there will be famine, right? Food shortages. Okay, and again, it's an idea that seems very simple, very logical. It's wrong, but very simple, very logical. It has been used over and over and over as a plot for stories, movies. Does this remind you of any movies or even books? Movies in the past 2 or 3 years? Remember Thanos from the Marvel Universe? Thanos? You've seen Infinity War and Endgame? Isn't this what Thanos was all about? The population of the universe keeps growing and the food is limited, therefore, there will be starvation unless half the population is eliminated. Snap, right? That was Thanos' whole argument. What was like, we need to kill off half the universe to prevent this type of famine that Thomas Malthus predicted. He doesn't refer to Malthus, but it's the same idea. Okay, so this has been used for movies like, oh, what else? Uh, I can flash back to classic movies like Death Race 2000 or Soylent Green. Um, Movies that are about populations that are struggling for food. Okay, anyhow, turns out Malthus was wrong. Okay, Malthus predicted that the country would not be able to produce enough food, let's say calories, to serve its people by 1850. Okay, completely the opposite is true of England today. People have considerably more calories to consume than they did at Malthus's time. And in fact, for most developed countries, a surplus of calories is a larger problem than a shortage of calories. Okay? In other words, we eat too much yummy food, which is plentiful, inexpensive, and we're not starving. Why was Malthus wrong? Um, he overlooked innovation. Um, that's the overlooked innovation. That's the simplest explanation. Um, there are some other things that he might have been wrong about as well. One is that the population just grows inevitably. Um, yeah, people pay attention to how expensive children are when they decide to reproduce. Malthus was an interesting guy. Part of what he did do was preach like better birth control, where he was like people should be more moral in their lives and reproduce only when it's responsible. Um, Malthus was interestingly a priest, and I don't know, just thought that people could not control their desire to reproduce. That was part of his argument was we need to get in better control of our urges and cut back on reproduction. Okay. But again, he's just assuming that the population growth, for one, happens on its own no matter what people do. It turns out that's not correct. People do pay attention to how expensive children are, and if prices of food are going up, presumably people would cut back on number of kids they have. But also, the big thing is he overlooked innovation. And even though the amount of land was fixed, uh, the amount that can be grown on a piece of land has increased. So, what I looked up is that in 1800, an acre of land in England produced about 20 bushels of wheat a year. Okay. In 2020, it's about 200 or more bushels of wheat. So the the rate of increase in productivity has been astonishing. And this is due to things like innovations in farming equipment. Many of these things happened during the 1800s. Remember, Malthus wrote around 1800, and he kept updating his predictions every few years in a new edition of his book. And he kept like postponing the date when everything was going to go to heck. But these innovations happened in the mid to late 1800s. For example, the first mechanical tractor, okay, as opposed to having your horse pull your plow along. First mechanical tractor was developed in 1859. The Burpee Seed Corporation was really the first company that bred seeds specifically for productivity and other desirable characteristics. Prior to that, A farmer would just keep some of last year's seeds to grow this year's crop. Okay, very simple thing, but maybe this farmer didn't have the best seeds to begin with. So let me add kind of selective breeding. Really paying attention to selective breeding of plants and animals. I have a neighbor who is investing a ton of money into producing a better strain of table grape based on something called a scuppernong grape, which is the size of a golf ball. Problem with current scuppernongs is that even though they are delicious, they have a very tough skin and they have seeds. And so no one's going to buy a delicious grape even though it has tough seeds. So he wants to breed the perfect table grape, thin skinned, juicy, delicious scuppernong grapes without seeds. Okay. Um, Fine. This is the kind of thing that people have been doing for have been doing very consciously as a business for the past 150 years. Okay. Prior to that, there was some selection of breeds, like, oh, hey, these cattle do especially well around my farm, so I'm going to rely on them on breeding the future generations. There had been some casual selective breeding, but the first real scientific programs for designing better crops or livestock came along in the mid 1800s. Uh, fertilizer, what else? Pesticides, herbicides. What else? Irrigation systems. Okay, and so on. Okay, so for a variety of reasons, there's been huge, in a variety of different areas, there have been huge, important innovations in agricultural technology, production techniques, which have increased the amount of food we can produce by at least a factor of 10 for wheat. Okay. Um, Alrighty. So, why was Malthus wrong? Okay, or let me say, Malthus overlooked kind of a cycle of innovation. Okay. When something becomes scarce, then drives up prices. Okay. Then the higher prices mean it's more profitable to innovate. You know, if the price of of rice doubles, then that doubles the reward for developing a more productive strand of rice that you can sell for a premium price. Um, or increases the profits from new machinery to grow and harvest rice. It makes it more profitable to innovate. Okay. And then more innovation leads to more output. And more output means the scarcity is gone. Or less scarcity. And lower prices. Okay, so whenever some resource starts to get scarce, there is generally this chain of events through, I guess, economic markets in order to that naturally alleviates or reduces the scarcity. So another example is petroleum. Okay, and the idea of peak oil. Okay, so this is an idea that came out of the 1950s. A geologist named Hubbard. King was his first name, King Hubbard. Okay, King Hubbard made a couple of connections. So he's a geologist. He had been working in the petroleum industry, extracting oil, and he made two observations. Uh, Population is growing. The demand for oil per person is also growing. So not only is the population growing, but also how much oil each person in the population wants to consume. So remember, this is the 1950s. This is when cars and long distance driving are taking off. So people are consuming more oil per person. Okay, but the petroleum in the ground is fixed. Those dead dinosaurs aren't producing more oil. The oil that's underground right now is all we have. So we can draw an inference from this that there will be a peak in oil production, and then afterwards um, we will have to get by on less oil per person. Okay, and so let's see, I think this idea of peak oil was first proposed in 1956, and the peak would occur around 1965 to 1970. Okay. Okay. Now, again, you can look at the argument here. It's basically Malthus again, right? Population is growing, petroleum is fixed. Therefore, eventually the population will grow too large for the petroleum. It can get out of the earth. And then after that, we're going to be forced to cut back on how much petroleum we consume starting around 1965. Okay, well, let me tell you all kind of a little spoiler. 1965 came and went, and there was no peak in oil production or consumption. Hubbard kind of pushed back his prediction to 1970 or later. In the 1970s, when peak oil never happened, he pushed back his prediction to 1990. And then as the 90s approached, he pushed back his prediction of peak oil to about 2000. Okay, and then he died, so he never updated his predictions anymore. But it never happened. Um, as you all are probably aware, we seem to be consuming more fossil fuels than is ideal for the environment, right? Fossil fuel production and consumption have not been going down since 1965. Quite the opposite. They have been rising fairly steadily since the 50s through today. What went wrong with Hubbard's predictions? First, maybe discovery of new reserves. Okay, in other words, oil underground that hasn't yet been tapped. And also innovation. Okay, innovation that I guess does at least two things: more efficient production of oil, but also ways to make previously unviable petroleum becomes viable. Okay, so there might be petroleum underground, or there is plenty of petroleum underground that's known, but it will never be economically efficient to extract it. You know, it might cost, like selling a barrel of this oil might give $50, but the cost of extracting it is more than $50. Okay, so that's what I mean by it's not economically viable to extract the oil, except we are getting smarter about ways to get this oil out of the ground economically, including, for example, not exactly oil, but a big innovation has been hydraulic fracturing to extract natural gas. Okay? Earlier, it had been thought that if you didn't have large pockets underground that were filled with gas, there was no point trying to get gas out of the small little pockets where it might be underground. And then hydraulic fracturing came along. Let's just crack the ground underground so that those many small holes just kind of join up and we have a big pocket of gas underground to pump up to the surface. I mean, this is all a simplification of the fracking process. But again, it's like an attempt to make previously unviable gas viable to bring to market, and it's been very productive. So between these two things, or between discovery of new resources or new reserves underground and making known reserves viable to extract, the viable known known petroleum is higher now than ever. Okay. So, like, just as with Malthus, the opposite of the prediction came true. And so here's maybe a big lesson that can come of this. Economics can relieve scarcity. It's the same, like the moral of the Malthus story is the same as the moral of the peak oil story. Market forces will tend to solve this problem for us. So I brought up, like, if a barrel of oil sells for $50 and it would cost $75 to extract a barrel of oil, well, all the time oil wells are deciding, is it profitable to pump right now? If the price of oil gets above $75 a gallon, then that barrel, then that oil well goes into production. So, in part, high prices will cause more production to happen. So, if there ever is a scarcity of petroleum, all that needs to happen is some of the oil wells turn on when the price gets higher, and they start making profit at that higher price. When prices come down again, they shut down. Um, but higher prices will encourage more productivity and, the important thing, more innovation. Okay? So whenever I think about questions like, will the world ever run out of, and then some resource? Hey, my answer as an economist is no. Okay? And again, I go back to this process that I described earlier, that, you know, when something becomes scarce, drives the price up. And when the price becomes high, that means it's even more profitable than usual to innovate. It gives even more incentive for innovations, and then that leads to more output, relieving the scarcity and resulting in lower prices. So, purely motivated by profit, innovators can solve these problems. The worst case is if no innovation, if there's no innovation, like, again, even the worst case where there's no innovation, just the price goes up. And then people shift consumption. If the price of petroleum were to go up at this point and continually rise, it would be like yet another reason that would, or yet another thing that would motivate people to get electric cars, right? And that will, and as people were to switch, or if people do switch to electric cars, it helps reduce some of the, like, pressure on limited supplies of gasoline and bring down the price. Um, and so, worst case is really price goes up, people shift consumption to something that is more economical, whether that's, for petroleum to fuel cars, they could shift to electric. They could shift to ethanol. In other words, alcohol, liquor, moonshine. But already it's used in gasoline. So there are replacements, and again, price goes up, people shift consumption, and the problem is solved. Okay, sound good? Okay, so when you watch the Mad Max movies, you'll have seen some of Mad Max movies. Maybe, possibly. No. Okay, never mind. It's about a world that has run out of gasoline and society has collapsed. And I don't buy it. Okay, people are very good at innovating. Like humans are very good at innovating themselves out of bad situations. And like here's maybe the bottom line for even this course. Like there's great reason to hope for a wonderful economy and a wonderful future just because of like economics drives many solutions to many problems. Okay. So sound good? Okay. Um, how's that? The end? Are we ready to be done with principles of economics? No? Or okay. I've said the important things for the semester. Okay. So I am finished with class today. Would you all like to go home now? Okay, good, good. I told you all it would be a relatively short day, shorter than most days. Um, yeah, and that's it. You all have got about 48 hours to prepare for an exam now, right? Okay, good luck. That was another reason not to overload with material today.